Hey guys, it's me, Lady B, and welcome to Let's Talk. Just want to give a shout out to my director, my AG behind the cameras. And today, our topic is going to be about raising children as lesbians and how our children feel about us being lesbians. Alright, first things first, there's a lot of studies that's going out about being raised in a homosexual setting. And a lot of people believe that because the parents are gay or homosexual, that the children will become homosexual. In all actuality, no, that's not the truth and it's not the case. What is true is that it does cause some conflict in the household. Why? Because children are raised and also are reared to believe that, it's best to be raised in a mom and dad setting. Now, when you bring in two dads, two moms, it does become confusing. Now, the only way to avoid having all this confusion with your children is to actually have an open conversation with your children. Now, when I say open conversation, when I'm speaking about open conversation, I'm talking about age-appropriate conversations. Now, I'm not telling you, hey, if your child is 2, sit her down and like, hey, you know what? I'm a lesbian and I like women. That two-year-old is not going to understand half the crap you're talking about. But as time goes by, your child will have questions. For example, there was a study shown about 5-year-olds, and I don't remember the study exactly because I'm not going to quote it, but I will have the information in the bio underneath the video. But there were some studies regarding 5-year-olds and how they're adjusting being raised in the same-sex household. Now, it did show that these children did have some sort of confusion. Although they did not understand what was going on, they do go to school and they are around other children. So when, other kids are talking about, oh, my daddy or my mommy, they feel a little ashamed and they can't speak about their 2 mommies or their 2 daddies. So in a way, I feel like most lesbians and most gays push on their sexuality onto their kids too early. Now, I'm not judging anyone and I'm not telling you how to raise your children. Never. But once again, I feel like some conversations should be age appropriate. Now, when you start introducing sexuality to your kid, most of the times it's around 7, 8. When you start talking about sexuality, your bodies, and things like that, I think that's when you should introduce the conversation about liking the same sex. Now, one thing that I did read about, and it did kind of strike up some interesting debates for me, was that there was a young lady who was raised in a lesbian home. And her issue was that she didn't like the fact that she didn't have a male figure in her home. Yes, there's a dominant lesbian that, there's always a dominant lesbian. Regardless who's the stud, who's the femme, whatever the hell you want to call it, there's always someone that's dominant in the household. But she didn't like the fact that she didn't have a male figure. Now, one of the suggestions that I do make, and one of the suggestions that was made by a professional psychologist, is that yes, if you are in a same-sex relationship, whether it's male or female, you should have someone of the opposite sex around your child. Meaning, if you are in a lesbian relationship, you should have some sort of uncle daddy around so they can get an idea of what the gender roles really should be like. And when I say this, it's because yes, we're raising our children being lesbians. We are lesbians. We live in the same-sex house. They do see 2 women kissing each other. They do see 2 women being affectionate with each other. But at the same time, they still have to come up with their own gender identity. They have to decide who they are for themselves. You don't want to influence your child's sexuality. One thing that I did do was actually interview some children. I did speak to some kids regarding being raised by some lesbians. And it was very interesting to hear the child's point of view as opposed to talking to other women. One thing I did learn was that children being raised by lesbians are very self-conscious. They are very self-conscious and very aware of what people say about their mothers. And another thing that I have learned as well is that it does hurt them, especially if they're not kept in the loop. Now, one of the things that I spoke to a range of children from the ages of 9, of course with the consent of their mothers. And I went from age 9, I spoke to an 11-year-old. I also spoke to a 16-year-old, and I had the opportunity of speaking to an 18-year-old. So I had different ranges of age group, and it was very interesting to hear their point of view. Now, the 18-year-old, she had a lot more to say regarding growing up in a lesbian home. Her parents were together for about, I think it was 11 or 12 years. Her mother was previously married to a man, and she felt like she was taken away from her father, and which wasn't the case. Her mother and father did divorce, and the father did go on to get married, and the mother decided to, you know, come out and be openly lesbian, and she was lesbian for quite some time. And but the child felt like she was ripped away from her father so her mother could live this lifestyle. And she also felt like she was robbed of the opportunity to get male affection or to learn what it was like to actually have a male figure in her life. Why? Because her mother actually surrounded herself with other lesbians, and she didn't open up to being around heterosexual couples as well. Now, I feel like that is a mistake that is made by most lesbians. I'm not gonna say all lesbians, because most lesbians do, you know, hide within the community and hang around only lesbians. Why? So they can keep away from judgment and keep away from, you know, being scrutinized by others. But you are being scrutinized. The lesbian community is the most cynical community ever. Like, they're the most judgmental community out here. The LGBT community is the most judgmental community. They judge within each other, and they want everyone to accept them. So it's kind of hard not to have judgment. But from what I've learned with these kids is that they felt that their parents didn't understand them. Their parents didn't answer any questions that needed to be answered. Like, for example, when it was time to talk about sex and to talk about their bodies and to talk about certain things that they were feeling, their mothers weren't open to answering these questions. And they also, being raised in a completely lesbian household, they were hearing negatives about the opposite sex. Now, this goes back to forcing your sexuality on your kids. I mean, I understand that you don't want to be with a man and you don't have a sexual desire for a man, but you can't force that on the kid. I would think that would be something that should be left to be open, and you need to be open-minded with that, because at the end of the day, you are raising a straight child. Anyways, another thing that I also learned as well was that some of the lesbians were kind of keeping their children away from religion. And I don't know if it's just religion itself or if it was church. But some of the kids were like, well, I go to church with my grandma, but I'm not allowed to go to church with my mom. And that was another confusing situation, because at the end of the day, I would think you'd want to teach your children about a higher power, about God, about spirituality, whichever you believe. But keeping them away from some sort of religion because of your own personal beliefs, I feel like that's another thing that kind of messes up our children as well. Now, the one positive that I did get from the kids were, the kids that I did speak to, were they were overachievers. You had honor roll students. I had the 18-year-old did get a scholarship to go to college. We had from the youngest that was 9, honor roll. She was in magnet school. I had the 11-year-old was in magnet program as well. So yeah, we're excelling when it comes to raising some children that are academically successful. But then when it comes to socially, they were outcasts. They didn't really have any friends. Some of them haven't gone to sleepovers. Some of them haven't been able to hang around with heterosexual families because they were being pushed away because their parents are gay. So that was one of the situations that I did get with that. But at the same time, I did get some positives as well. One thing that was really, really positive with all the kids that I did speak with, that they learned about love. They are learning to openly love everyone and accept everyone. So that was one thing that was positive about being raised in a lesbian home. So my only suggestion as lesbians raising children is that we openly communicate with our children, but also let them come into their own on their own. Don't force that on them. That is all with Let's Talk. Once again, Maya G is behind the camera. And if you have any comments, concerns, you have any, suggestions or anything, you can go ahead and email us below at letstalksfl@gmail.com. Thank you, and you have a great night.